Okay, so we begin now from our discussion from our last meeting. So from our last meeting, we mentioned that the Bureau of Customs in implementing these post-clearance audit provisions under the law and under the rules, it has to come up with a specific policy or a specific strategy. So it has to come up with a procedure or a policy on how it has to proceed with conducting this post-clearance audit. So one important consideration regarding this post-clearance audit policy that the Bureau of Customs has to adopt is that the Bureau of Customs has to strike a proper balance between border control with overall facilitations. Remember that one of the functions of the Bureau of Customs under the CMTA is that it should protect our borders from entry of goods which are prohibited or regulated in nature without the proper permits. But at the same time, the Bureau of Customs also has the function to facilitate trade. So in coming up with the post-clearance audit policy or the post-clearance audit strategy, the Bureau of Customs has to strike a balance between these two. So it has to be strict such that it will catch all, or it will catch most, if not all, of the violators, of the smugglers, or of those prohibited items. But at the same time, it should not be overly strict or it should not be overly prohibitive such that it will restrict or it has unduly caused delay in the process of trade. No? It has unduly affected the process of trade. Wag naman ganon. So the Bureau of Customs has to strike a balance between these two objectives. So again, it's a balance between border control and trade facilitation. So second, the Bureau of Customs also has to consider voluntary compliance. We mentioned this before in our previous discussion, the voluntary compliance framework, as it is or it can be considered as the most cost-effective and efficient approach. So we mentioned before in our previous discussions that under voluntary compliance framework, the importers comply by themselves without need for supervision or strict monitoring from the Bureau of Customs. So in that sense, the Bureau of Customs no longer has the need to constantly be on the lookout for possible violations from the importers. So again, other than striking a balance between border control and trade facilitation, the Bureau of Customs may also consider or must also consider voluntary compliance framework as its approach in conducting or in formulating its post-clearance audit policy. So just also to recall from our last meeting, from our last discussion, so we discussed the concept of segmentation of traders. We discussed the 4 types of traders. The type 1 is the trader who is voluntarily compliant or who voluntarily complies with customs laws, rules, and regulations. The keyword here is voluntary in the sense that compliance comes naturally or compliance comes without the need for consistent or constant supervision or monitoring from the Bureau of Customs. In other words, with or without the presence of the Bureau of Customs conducting its audit, the importer nevertheless complies or obeys the laws and rules regarding importation. The type 2 of the traders are those who try to be compliant but are not always successful. So these are the traders who occasionally or on some instances commit errors or inadvertent mistakes in their declaration or in their computation. So while good faith is there, they try to be compliant. There an error or errors always find its way to the declaration. So there is also a need to monitor these types of traders. The third type of trader, as we have discussed before, are the traders who avoid complying if possible. And the fourth type of traders, as we have previously discussed, are the traders who are deliberately non-compliant, or even though the Bureau of Customs is there monitoring or checking up on them, they still deliberately or with intent fail to comply. So why is it important for the Bureau of Customs to segment the traders? No? Why is it important for the Bureau of Customs to identify traders as belonging to type 1, 2, 3, or 4? It's because the Bureau of Customs will have to tailor fit or will have to adopt its strategies uh, as commensurate to or as maybe appropriate to the trader or importer concerned. So if the importer is the type of importer who is voluntarily compliant, then the Bureau of Customs correspondingly will make it easy for the importer to comply. On the other hand, or on the other end, no, on the other extreme end, for importers or for traders who are type 4 or those who decide or those who deliberately fail to comply, then the Bureau of Customs may be or will be constrained to use the full force of law. So in other words, it's important to segment or to identify the types of traders concerned because the Bureau of Customs will have to adopt a strategy or a policy which is consistent or commensurate with the type of traders that it is dealing with. So the Bureau of Customs, remember, has unlimited resources. So if the importer is a type 1 importer, then there is no need to use the full force of the law. On the other hand, as we have mentioned earlier, if the importer is the type of importer who deliberately fails to comply, then it's only appropriate that the Bureau of Customs allot its resources and use the full force of the law to implement customs laws and rules in the case of type 4 importers. So we have also mentioned earlier the concept of voluntary compliance framework. So this voluntary compliance framework, as we have mentioned earlier, is most appropriate for traders belonging to type 1 and type 2, those who voluntarily comply or those who try to comply but in only some instances fail to do so. This voluntary compliance framework may also apply to type 3 traders, but these type 3 traders should show the necessary improvement to change, so that they can later on be classified as type 1 or 2 traders. Again, the keyword here is voluntary. So this is only appropriate for those traders or importers who exhibit their willingness or their ability to comply with the pertinent laws and rules of the Bureau of Customs. Voluntary compliance can be achieved through three broad ways. Number one, decreasing compliance cost. This can be found in your PCA guidelines and manual. Number two, increasing incentives on compliance. And number three, increasing probability of exposure. In this sense, Customs is encouraged to provide compliance programs or facilitation measures at the border as an incentive for traders to be more compliant and promote Customs business partnership concept. From our last discussion also, I remember we also discussed the concept of promoting improved compliance via self-assessment. So we mentioned before that self-assessment is important because it significantly reduces the workload that the Bureau of Customs has to do, or proper self-assessment for that matter. In this regard, the Bureau of Customs should consider the following. It should promote, number one, it should promote the benefit of compliance and provide information and advice via phone, internet, or other means. So we have seen this at work. So if you look, for instance, if you look at the site of the Bureau of Customs, you will see there is a mechanism there wherein you can get in touch with the Bureau of Customs directly. You can make your inquiries directly through the Bureau of Customs website, and then you also have, for your specific importations, you can also use the BOC portal. That can also be used as your means to get in touch with the Bureau of Customs to make your respective inquiries or request for information. And also, as I understand it, if you also need to do it in a face-to-face or in a personal manner, then you can also proceed to the Bureau of Customs. I think they have their customer care center wherein you can make an inquiry with a frontliner, a BOC frontliner, who will be able to direct you to the proper office or officer of the Bureau of Customs who can address your query. So in other words, the Bureau of Customs will make or will have to make, will consider making information readily available to the public so that the public can it will be easy for the public to comply with the laws and rules of the Bureau of Customs. No, make it easy for the public to comply. Make information readily available for those who may be needing the information. Kung may tanong dyan, make it easy for those queries to be addressed. No. Number 2, we also mentioned in our previous discussion that the Bureau of Customs, among others, no, we also mentioned that the Tariff Commission also offers advanced rulings. We discussed advanced ruling in our previous discussion, and we mentioned that these advanced rulings are mechanisms by which self-assessment is promoted. Compliance by self-assessment is promoted. We discussed the concept of advanced ruling in such a manner that the importer is encouraged to request for a ruling regarding origin or classification or valuation from either the Bureau of Customs or from the Tariff Commission. And after this request, no, the Bureau of Customs and the Tariff Commission will issue its respective advance ruling, which will serve as a guide for the importer or for the declarant or for the customs broker to make his or her respective declaration. No, advance ruling. There are pertinent provisions under the CMTA regarding advance ruling. We have discussed that. And there are also relevant CAO, CMOs regarding advance ruling. So we have also mentioned that in class before. So again, advance ruling is a mechanism by which BOC promotes compliance by self-assessment. So how else does the BOC promote improved compliance by self-assessment? So number 3, in the course of audit, in the event that the Bureau of Customs conducts its audit, the auditor should help improve internal controls and system of the auditees. They can make recommendations if they see areas for improvement. They can point that out to the auditees. Kapag nag-audit na, they can make their recommendations and make their suggestions to the auditees so that the auditees can make the necessary changes within their organization. And finally, the Bureau of Customs, we have mentioned this already in our previous discussion. No? The BOC should give an opportunity to voluntarily request an amendment of customs declaration without penalty. We pointed out before in our class that there are provisions, or there is a provision under the CMTA which allows or which gives an opportunity for the goods declaration to be amended or to be corrected without penalty.